I'll be the moderator for this session. Just a few items before we get started. Montana Kidlit Festival is sponsored by Humanities Montana, the Billings Public Library, the Writer's Voice, this House of Books, and Rocky Mountain College. Our sessions will be photographed and recorded for Community Channel 7. They might be shared on social media and in the press. Before you leave today, please visit the book sales table and support your Montana writers and illustrators. They appreciate your support. And they will autograph a copy of their book for you. Also, be sure you have a ticket for a chance to win a door prize at the end of our session. Does everybody have tickets? Okay, we'll get started. I'm delighted to introduce to you Precious McKenzie, who lives in Billings, Montana. She is the author of over 35 books for children. Her most recent books include Cinder Yeti, Ruffian, and forthcoming Nest. She is an English professor at Rocky Mountain College and is the regional advisor for the Montana chapter of the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, SCBWI. To learn more, visit preciousmckenzie.com. And I'll just turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Wow, this is exciting. Thank you for coming here on a Saturday, on a beautiful summer day. And thank you, Julie, for organizing book sales and everything in the public library. This has been a lot of fun. So I was going to focus on Ruffian today because that's the one I've been promoting most recently. It came out during the pandemic, so I still consider it its birth year, even though it's a little over a year old, because I don't count the pandemic year. So fresh start. So I'm just starting to do some more school visits and things like that to promote Ruffian. So fingers crossed it does well. It is based on real events. It is considered historical fiction for teens. And for a book to be considered historical fiction, the setting has to be 25 to 30 years old. When I was younger, that seemed like a million years, but now I'm like 25 years is really not that long ago. And it's kind of interesting. Ruffian actually died the year that I was born. So for it to be historical fiction makes me feel like an absolute dinosaur. But there you have it. So it is based on the life of the actual champion racehorse Ruffian. But then to give it an appeal to teen readers, my editor said, you need to have human characters as well. It can't just be about a horse. It has to be something else. So I had to branch out, and I created a fictional world of humans that interacted with this horse throughout her career. Okay, some of the humans are actual humans who worked with her, but the main character, Meg Murphy, the teenage girl who works with her throughout her career, is completely fictional. She never existed. So I just needed to get a young person in there that young people like yourselves could relate to. Okay, see it through her eyes. So there you have it. And that's a picture of the cover, which I think is absolutely beautiful. The cover layout design is by Tara Ramo, Florida graphic designer. But the painting itself, the horse's eye and the bridle, that was a painting by Montana artist Henry Blond. So he custom painted that for us, and I think it's just gorgeous. Love it. Okay. So inspiration. What inspired me to write about Ruffian? Well, this is my guy, Sky. As you can see, he is not a racehorse. He's a little plump to be a racehorse. And this is his friend, Bert, his pasture mate. And he is not a racehorse either. I just love the horses. And when I was working on my MFA, the professor I was working with, she had me write like 10 picture books throughout this course for the MFA. And one of the assignments was write a biography for kids. And at that time, 3.5, 4 years ago, I was pretty disenchanted with the human population in general. And I thought, I don't want to write a biography about a human. So I was being kind of stubborn. I admit that now. So I kind of combed through my memory and combed through some YouTube videos and stuff like that. And my dad has always been a huge fan of horse racing And we always watch the Kentucky Derby together. Even now, 2,500 miles apart, we still call or text each other like, who you putting money on? So we still enjoy that. That's kind of been our thing. So when I was asked to write a biography, I thought, it doesn't have to be human. She didn't say it had to be human. So I remember my dad talking about these various great racehorses from his generation, because he was very much a child of the 60s and 70s. And I remember the name Ruffian, and again, she died the same year I was born, so I didn't have a memory of her at all. So I went back through the archives and I looked at her racing footage, and I thought, holy cow, this story needs to be told again for a new generation. This athlete should not be forgotten. And the people who worked with her should not be forgotten. The incredible dedication and love they had for her. So that led me down the rabbit hole. So I originally wrote, I kind of laugh about it now, I originally wrote this novel. I thought it would be a picture book biography. So I did all this research about her life, all the details, and just really got into it because I love doing research in libraries. And I was so proud of my work. And I sent it to my professor, and I'm waiting for her response and her feedback. I'm like, she's going to tell me it's wonderful. And she says me back, she's like, what are you trying to do, traumatize children? And I was like, what do you mean? I'm not trying to traumatize children. She said, you cannot have a picture book where the main character dies. Spoiler alert. But she's like, you can't do that for little kids. Like, you are going to make a 5-year-old cry. Do not do it. So I was a little upset. But she was exactly right, So I swallowed my pride and I said, she's spot on. I trust her judgment. And then she said, you have something here and you've done the work. Make it into a novel. Make it something for older readers and add some human characters, flesh out that, and I'll help you with that. Because I said, I've never tried something like that before. I'm not a novelist. And she said, yes, you can be. Okay. It's like Sue said, you just like, okay. And you take that leap of faith and you just give it a try. And I had a lot of good mentors. As I worked through my program at Spalding, Leslie Newman, she was the one who told me, you need to make this a novel. Love her. Beth Bauman, Edie Hemingway, just fantastic novelists in their own right that were really encouraging and positive and so generous with their time and their comments. So very fortunate. And then I think some of you in this room might have seen earlier drafts of it too, as it was through the process. But it ended up becoming my creative thesis for my MFA. And then after I finished the MFA program, I went back and revised it a few more times and then sent it out for editors to look at, and got picked up. So how did I do all of this? I love researching into archives, and the more obscure, the better. So what I did is I reached out to Keeneland in Kentucky, and they have archives for every horse that has ever raced. I mean, if you don't know where to go, you contact the Keeneland research librarians, and they will find the files for you. And their wonderful research librarians sent me in the mail photocopies of all of Ruffian's records, everything they had. It was extremely generous, and they did not charge me for it. It was fantastic. Yeah, so I am completely in debt to the research librarians at Keeneland. So they had magazine clippings about her, ESPN, Life magazine, anywhere that she was talked about or written about, they had it. And they had her pedigree and race times, everything. Lovely photographs. So I just combed through all of those papers and took notes, trying to make sense of who this athlete was, who this horse was, and then who the people were that worked with her, and really trying to figure out the details of her story, because the ending was so heartbreaking, right? So here's just one of the newspapers that talked about toward the end of her life and the tragedy. But I really love the photo of her with her jockey Vasquez on her back. And from all the earlier accounts of her, even when she was just a little filly, everyone said she was just extremely beautiful, but fierce and big. They said she was huge. She was monstrous. Just a powerhouse. And across the board, people just admired her for an athlete. And just, so I was hooked, needless to say. Here's another newspaper or magazine article. Came from the Blood Horse. And this is just an image of her face. You get an idea of just look at those eyes and those ears, how alert and intense she was. Just absolutely majestic. Here's another racing image of her. Again, they said that she was even bigger than Secretariat. She was a massive horse. And there was some discussion, too. It was like, who would have been a better racehorse if they would have raced together? Could she have beaten Secretariat? We don't know because they never raced together. But massive stride. Here's another clip, right? So she was winning all of her races, and she had various injuries that took her out of running for a few months at a time, and they rehabbed her and things like that. And then they'd bring her back in, and she'd win the races after that. And then some people say Belmont Park wanted to drum up ticket sales. I don't know if that's true or not, but they were encouraging Ruffian's owners, the Jannies, to have a match race between her and the fastest colt. Okay, and I guess the Jannies weren't very comfortable with that idea at first, but they eventually came on board with it, and they decided, okay, let's do this. We will pit her against one other horse, the greatest colt of that time, and we'll see who's the fastest. And the media got hold of it, and it became a whole marketing campaign, and it became basically in 1975 the battle of the sexes. And that was also the time when you got Billie Jean King playing tennis, against men, breaking records. So it was very much part of the women's movement of the 70s, and they latched on to the story of Ruffian, and there you have it. So in my book, I think my female character, Meg, also kind of mirrors that in the struggles that she goes through. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. And here's a picture of Ruffian with one of her grooms, Squeaky Tinsdale. And as you can see, here's some buttons that they were selling for the match race. Ruffian, if you're on Team Ruffian, you get a Ruffian button. If you're on Team Foolish Pleasure, the colt, you get the Foolish Pleasure, so who's going to win kind of thing. And I won't tell you right now what happened. But this is from another race. This is not her last race, obviously. But you have her owners and her jockey and Frank Whiteley, her trainer up there. And again, people felt so strongly about her, and she really captured the American racing imagination, because for a filly to run like she did and to break the records that she did was just outstanding. And people fell in love with her. So kind of going back to research, it really stretched me to keep track of all these numbers and dates and to stay organized. And I needed a structure for the book itself. So I decided it makes sense to go in chronological order. Right? I don't go into detail about every single one of her races, but I try to hit some of the major ones and use some of the details from those races. But then, of course, her last race is in there, and I think it's the most intense scene in the book, as it should be. But I kept this huge whiteboard like teachers use with the dry erase markers, and I put it on my piano in my dining room, and I told everyone in my household, do not touch this board, do not erase it, do not lean against it, don't go near it. just don't. And you can see, so I've got the years that just kind of go, it's a timeline. There, 74, May 74. I made a note, she's out of rehab by this point, because as I'm writing the chapters, I have to keep track of where is the horse? Is she in Kentucky? Is she in South Carolina? Is she in Belmont? Where is she physically? Where are the people physically? Because they do move around a lot. And where are her injuries? What is she up to? Who's riding her? Because Vasquez rode her a lot, but they did have other jockeys that rode her, and that was important. The times, I wrote her speeds. I wrote the distances that she ran, because I needed to see it, in order. Right? And I think my family thought I was probably a little crazy, obsessive, and I was. And then you can't see too many of them, but I also had like little notes with more text around the page, like little details I wanted to remember to include in those chapters. So I'd have like sticky notes going across the top. I drew sketches of characters that I stuck around the sides of it too, just to really feel like, okay, got the timeline. That's my basic structure. Let's tell a cohesive narrative to the end. But then I knew how it ended, and I didn't want to leave kid readers just absolutely heartbroken. I didn't think that would be appropriate. I wanted to leave them with some hope. So then I added some more chapters about Meg and her family, because my biggest question is I'm watching her racing footage. They're really good races. And then that last final race, they have the footage on YouTube, and it's heartbreaking. And after watching that over and over and over again, because I was listening to the way the announcers called the races, so I could get that dialogue and that tone just right. And I thought, how in the world could the people who worked with her so closely and loved her so much, how could they go on after she passed away so tragically? That was the big question for me. How do you go on after something like that? As a horse, like, what do you do when the horse of your heart is gone? Right? So that was the big question I had as I was working on this. What do you do? How do you get through it? And again, it was kind of going back to newspapers and magazines and reading what the industry professionals had said, things like that. But what those sports writers don't ask, they don't ask that question. How do you go on? I think that's something you just don't talk about. So that's where I just had to dig deep and tap into like personal experience, what I've known from other people who have lost horses tragically, unfortunately, and use that emotion and convey that hurt, that loss, and get that love there too. And then this is actual photograph from her last race when she fatally injures herself at last race, and they couldn't get her to stop running. Her jockey could not get her to stop running, couldn't get her to slow down. He tried everything, and she just kept going. She was rearing, she was out of control. So much pain. And they did. I personally think they did it. And they put her through surgeries after that to try to save her. And she did not come out of the anesthesia well. And she was thrashing and did more damage and just busted bones. And they finally had to slip up. And that was the last match race. It was terribly, terribly sad. And the whole nation mourned for her. And they mourned for her owners. They mourned for everyone. Because America had fallen in love with her. And she represented something, especially for women, right? This tenacity, this fight, this elegance, She was the women's movement in a sense in the 70s. So when she died, America and horse racing mourned. And they actually buried her at Belmont Park where she passed. And they said they pointed her nose to the finish line at Belmont. That just makes me cry. I think it's wonderful. So not to spoil anything. It's a very shocking image to see on track. Thank you.
it had to be more than just a story about a horse, right? How are we going to get kids invested in this story emotionally? How are we going to get them to connect with people and learn and grow? So this was my sketch of Meg Murphy, my main protagonist.
And I am not an illustrator. Thank you. You like her arms? So this is how I imagined her. I'm like, okay, she's at 13 at the start of the story, and then we see her grow through high school as Ruffian goes through the races. And I did a character sketch, like, who is she? What are her hopes and dreams? What does she want? What is she afraid of? You know, who is this kid at 13? What does she look like? And I think it's fun if you're a writer, like which actor would you have play this person? For me, it would be Elle Fanning. Dye Elle Fanning's hair dark, and that's who I'd cast for Meg. Spot on. Anyway, so there she is with her grain bucket and her lead rope and her kind of cowboy boots. So I thought, well, she wants to work with horses because she's a kid that comes from Montana, but she moves to Kentucky because her dad takes a new job in Kentucky, and she does not want to move from Montana and leave everything behind and go to Kentucky. And she has to leave her beloved horse behind in Montana. So that's kind of a sub-thread in the story, too. So when she gets to Kentucky, she wants to find, or she needs to find, people who love horses and dogs just like she does. She needs to find her people. Okay? She wants to be part of something. She wants to be appreciated. She wants to be accepted. She's 13 years old, right? Trying to find herself. And then what is she afraid of? Well, she's afraid of a lot of things. But here's the big one. Being stuck doing what is expected of girls. Getting married, settling down into boredom is what because again, this is the early 1970s. It starts in 72, right? So there's still the pressure on girls, not a big push to go to college yet for a lot of girls, but it's traditional, get married, have kids. And Meg is pushing back against that in a big way. Big way in the story. So that's how she came to life. And again, she's not a real person. And this is her cousin, Tuck. He's kind of like her antagonist in some ways. But overall, he's not a bad character. He's just kind of annoying for Meg, okay? But he does challenge her a little bit. He's got a little bit of swagger. He makes a little bit of mischief. He does like to be the center of attention. He's a 13-year-old boy. He's very popular at school. But secretly, he doesn't like people who mock him, right? So he's got a little insecurity there, right? A lot of swagger, but some insecurity. And he doesn't want to be shown up by a girl, i.e. Meg, his cousin, specifically. So they have a little competition going on there. So those are two of the main characters that are completely fictional. And then I invented Meg's family, like her Aunt Louise, her Uncle Doc. Her uncle is actually fictional, but based off the track veterinarians. So that's how Meg gets connected with the horse racing industry in Kentucky because of her Uncle Doc. And he brings her along. And when she meets Ruffian for the first time, again, this is completely fictional, she's there at her birth because her uncle is the vet. So she gets to help with the birth. So that's the origin story of how they come together. And then Meg just keeps working with her, largely because of the encouragement of her aunt and her uncle. Okay. So if you remember back to the beginning slides of my horse Sky, who is not a racehorse, I needed to get into the mind of a real racehorse too. After, being around quarter horses and paint horses, they're completely different. So what's a thoroughbred like? What are they like to ride? How are they to handle? What's the psychology? What's a personality like? Because they're not backyard pets. From what I've learned, I would not ride a racehorse. I am too old. I would fall off. No. So luckily, where I was working on my MFA in Louisville, right there. Churchill Downs is right there. And a friend of mine that was in my critique group, who lives in Louisville, she said, we can take a field trip to Churchill Downs and we can watch them breeze in the morning. And I was like, yes, let's do it. So, and it just happened to be that semester was the semester that Justify, and that's Justify's image right there, Justify was getting ready to run in the Belmont Stakes. So he was practicing at Churchill Downs, getting ready. And my friend Amy, she said, Justify is there, He's getting ready to win the Triple Crown in Belmont. Want to see him? Yes. So she said, okay, we have to be at the track at 7 a.m. We can watch him run and practice, and we can still make it to class on time. And I was like, let's do it. Absolutely, let's do it. So she rounded a few of us up, and then she was so smart. She took 2 of our professors with us. So if we were late, we had the professors with us. Absolutely brilliant. So anyway, I have some very smart friends like that. So sure enough, it was kind of a rainy, drizzly spring Kentucky morning, and we saw a whole bunch of thoroughbreds just out there exercising, breezing with their jockeys. And then the media were hyping up Justify's win because he had already won the Kentucky Derby and he'd already won the Preakness. So when he came out, they're like, okay, here comes Justify, so everybody's taking pictures. And we were standing right on the rail, so we could see him very closely. And when he came by, and you can't see it in here, I couldn't take the picture fast enough, but the look in his eyes was unlike anything I had ever seen, and I've never seen it again. And his ears and just the way he carried himself, he was just big and confident, and his ears were upright, and he just turned and he looked at you. And he was so intense and so absolutely fierce. I turned to her and I said, Amy, that horse is going to win the Triple Crown. And then 2 weeks later he did. The look, it's just, I don't know if all professional athletes have that look. They must, right? I just haven't looked closely enough. But there's an intensity there in those thoroughbreds that's incredible, that drive. So I thought of that. I need to capture that in Ruffian because she was a champion just like he was. She had that look because it's been written about, and it was so wonderful to see that look in person and to feel that. Absolutely incredible. So there he is. And there he is, stretching out there. You can't see it too well in my blurry photo, but just a massive, massive horse. And then in Kentucky at Churchill Downs, they also have a museum you can go to, a horse racing museum, and you can sit in a starting gate on a fake horse and feel like a jockey. So yes, I did that. I did not put the photos in there because I look like a dork. Like, she is not a jockey. But it was kind of cool because you get to feel how narrow the starting gates are. You get to feel like the springing action. And they have incredible exhibits about the trainers and the grooms and the female riders, everything. Just incredible. So I soaked up thoroughbred racing history every chance I got. And then where I board my horse, they also breed paint horses. So I've got to be there usually just after a birth because they like to have their babies at all kinds of odd hours. But I usually get to see them when they're a couple of hours old, and it's just magical. So this is one. That was Cricket from a few years ago. I think Cricket is now in either New Hampshire or Vermont, somewhere up east. But yeah, you get to see all of the goo and gook that happens during birth and how people clean up and how the people take care of mama and baby to make sure that they're all safe and healthy. And it's a miracle, it's just inspiring and wonderful. So I definitely picked the brain of the good people at the Diamond Inn and asked them all kinds of questions about baby horses and got that part filled in for her origin story, her birth story, and used use that. So there are some local people that are in this book, but they're fictionalized. And then there's me and Sky, his infamous picture of his tongue shooting out of his mouth. Because again, we're not professional like those thoroughbred racehorses. But yes, so that is us. Yeah, yeah. That's the way it is. That's the way we roll. But yeah, so it was a lot of research and a lot of there was a lot of sadness. I mean, when I was working on the chapter where she does pass away, those 2 chapters, it was really, really dark and sad. But I kept focusing on, okay, all of us are going to lose someone that we love sometime in our life. How do we get through it? And I kept that in the back of my mind. How do you get through this? How do you survive? How do you carry on? And how do you do something good after tragedy? Right? So that's where I kind of kept that. It's unspeakable, you know. But I wanted it to be a book about like love and loss and friendship too. So yep. Yeah.
You feel when, as you were writing that, did you feel any anger, maybe anger's too strong a word, about what they did to that mare? I mean, she was run probably too hard, too young, too frequently. She had injuries that then they kept rehabbing her. I mean, this wasn't in many ways a big surprise. I mean, I have a friend who's really involved in the whole racehorse industry in Kentucky, and I mean, you know, they do a lot of stuff down there that's not in the horse's best interest. They're in the owner's best interest or financially. And I mean, I just wondered if at some point you began to get. I mean, I know that wasn't what the book was about, but did you feel some anger or unhappiness about that?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question. Yeah, there were times where I'm like, why did they do the match race? If they wouldn't have done their match race, why? You know. But then I kept reading various reports, and it seemed like her team, especially her trainer Frank, I think he was trying to look out for her. But again, you're right. The pressures of the industry.
I was going to say
it's a business.
The trainers are under a huge amount of pressure to produce.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, and it's heartbreaking. And I kept thinking, I know that there's such controversy around horse racing today, and there's still injuries that happen that are fatal and horrible. I think they are starting to pay attention more.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you find with your research or follow-up that that her death influenced the track changes?
Absolutely.
You know, where they stopped these hard tracks and all that.
Absolutely, yeah, and you're exactly right, Sheila. It was because of her death, unfortunately, that they did start to look at track conditions, how they train them, medications they give, and then the progress in veterinary medicine since the 70s has made tremendous leaps and bounds of what they can do and the types of medicines that they do use now that they didn't know of back then, and ones that they've stopped using and stuff like that.
Yeah, and bringing horses up out of anesthesia, I've had that experience with a horse that just completely went nuts coming up out of anesthesia. I mean, he rolled the entire length of a 75-foot corral.
Oh my gosh!
We couldn't stop it, and I mean, we had ropes and everything on him, and you couldn't stop it. I mean, they just come up out of anesthesia. That's why they put them on tables and literally padded rooms in tables. They probably at that point with the drugs they had available could not have stopped that.
No, it was the accounts of her coming out of anesthesia and the surgery itself, the multiple surgeries. It was absolutely heartbreaking because the vets, you could tell they were trying to do everything they could, and there were teams of them, and they couldn't. And then when she came out, just thrashing and smashing everything, it was beyond at that point.
Yeah, you can't stop.
Yeah, some of the people said that when she came out, it was like she was still trying. They thought that she was still on the track, like she must have thought she was still running, but that could be. That's all conjecture, you know.
You know, I mean, mine was a little fat POA pony, and
they just come out
He
bad.
was not running on the track, but he really was running down that corral.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I mean,
Drug reaction.
fortunately, I've worked with and know a lot of just wonderful veterinarians who I believe that they really do their best. And I just think that it couldn't have been prevented. But yeah, watching that last footage, I was like, why did they have to do the match race? Why? But it became such a media promotional thing, unfortunately. But the horse that she ran against, Foolish Pleasure, he was actually born in a town that's about 45 minutes away from where my mom and dad live. So I was down there visiting them. They took me to see the place where he was born, and it's a little town, Williston, Florida. And they actually had brood mares and their colts out in the fields, and I took some pictures, and it was just absolutely lovely. But yeah, I mean, horse racing it's magnificent. The animals are powerful. It's thrilling, but there is that side that there's a lot of tragedy.
How did you navigate the intricacies of dealing with an actual real life subject and then fictionalizing all of that? I mean, are there legal questions that you have to be careful about, or do you just say, hey, this is a made up story, or how did you maneuver through that?
It was interesting. Like, I tried to use like the quotes that are from her owners and people like that. I just cited in the back of the book, like, this is what was actually said, to try to stay faithful to their accounts. So there's that. I did try to contact the jockey that rode her last, Vasquez, because he also lives in Florida. He retired down there, not far from where my parents live. So I sent him some emails. I'm like, I really want to talk to you about this. He didn't respond. So, but I can't blame him. You have a random stranger that wants to talk to you about something that horrible. You can't blame the man, But yeah, because I wanted to know, what did it feel like? Because from all accounts, he did everything he could to get her to stop as fast as he could, but he just could not.
Probably changed his email address. Seriously. He probably I would think that he would have been contacted by so many people.
Yeah, he continued to ride after her, but I think he's 80. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, hopefully someday I'll get a chance to talk
I would
to him.
think,
But
especially
I don't know. It would be awesome to see.
if he got your email, I think he
Yeah.
would have responded.
Yeah.
That leads me to believe that he did not get it, because I think he would have said, I just don't talk about this anymore. You would have responded.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, and I get it.
That's the courteous thing to do.
Yeah, I get it. I would totally tell somebody, no, I don't want to talk about it, if there's no way. I think that's got to be deeply personal. So, yeah.
I was wondering how you got his Spanish so perfect. Like, did you have somebody help you with that, or do you just have a good understanding of?
I had 4 years of Spanish.
Okay.
And I lived in Florida, so I'm not fantastic with Spanish, but
It felt very accurate. Like,
thank you.
having a lot of experience in Mexico, and I was married to a Mexican guy, and I was like, oh, she nailed him. So I wondered if it was
Thank you.
consulted with the jockey, or how you did that. You have a good working knowledge of Spanish, apparently.
Yep, and I read all kinds of accounts, and these jockeys are characters in and of themselves. I didn't realize it till I started this book, but they have to be if you think about it, because they're getting on these 1,000-pound animals, and they're traveling at these breakneck speeds where anything can happen. They've got to have some swagger.
A tiny little helmet.
With just a little helmet, yes. So reading accounts about the various jockeys is really fascinating. Their attitudes and their machismo and bravado, and how they one up each other and how they talk smack to one another to try to psych each other out. It's really fascinating, and you don't see that on TV. That's all the behind the scenes stuff. And
Yeah, you captured it really well.
thank you, thank you.
It was a great character.
You got to have some attitude if you're going to get on the back of one of those horses.
Precious, I can tell that you spent a lot of time on research. That's obvious. about how much, I don't know if you can say hours or months or years, how long did it take for you to write the book? You know, the research, to have it ready to send it to the publisher. How long was that process?
Let's see. It was pretty compared to my other books. Like Cinder Yeti took me 10 years to get it the way I was like
For a picture book.
For a picture book for less than 1,000 words. Ruffian took 2.5, 3 years for publication, but only because I was under deadline. I mean, I'm like, this is going to be my creative thesis. I need to do this to graduate on time. So I had that calendar like driving me to the finish line because I couldn't just say, oh, I don't feel like working on it. I had to keep going back because, my family was like, are you going to finish this program anytime soon? You know, we can't have you in school forever kind of thing. Love them, but,
They wanted to use the piano.
Yes, and they wanted to use the piano, so they wanted me to take the whiteboard down eventually. Yeah. But, so I had that going. And then, so after I finished the MFA, then it was probably another 3 months of revisions after that, because I sent it to Belu Publishers, because I love them. And I kind of met with her casually as I was working on Ruffian, and she said, when you finish it for your MFA, send it to me. It sounds really good. So I sent it to her, and then I went through cycles of revisions with her, and then she published it.
So that was your first book?
The first novel.
Was that your first book with Belu, though?
No, Cinder Yeti had just come out. Yeah. So like going back to your speech, like when you don't think you can do it, just keep doing it, like one foot in front of the other.
But you can't just dream it.
Exactly. You no matter how scary it is, just jump in. Any other questions?
How long did she race?
She raced from, what was it, just 2 years, I think. It was very, very short, yeah.
How old was she when she started racing?
She was the standard, like 2.5, I think, yeah. Yeah, so she died incredibly young, yeah.
How long do horses usually live for? 25 years?
How long do horses usually live? It depends.
It depends on the horses. They can live up to 40, 45, but
What about a racehorse?
the average racehorse will be 3 or 4
Yeah.
because they have to get put down for injuries. But
Really?
you know, a horse like your paint or whatever,
19
could be
years so far.
19, 20, 22. That's about when you're going to lose them. I mean, there's so many more sophisticated treatments for lameness. I mean, most horses don't die of old age. Most of them die out of unsoundness. If they no longer become sound, even pasture sound, people put them down. So
And even accidents. I mean, they have accidents. I mean, they're
They certainly
big
do.
animals that do wild things.
or even stupid
Even
things.
stupid
Or if
things,
they
yes.
turn
Yes.
wrong, or and a
Yeah.
lot of it depends on the breed.
Yeah.
A nice little sturdy quarter horse with good
Yeah.
bone and good feet. If somebody doesn't founder him, I mean, he can go on 25, 30. It's not, and you can still ride him, but big warm bloods end up with all kinds of OCD and all kinds of horrible ailments, and then they get put down. Even if they're
Never know.
thousands and thousands of dollars. So there's a huge range. Ponies can go on 35, 40, 35,
some
40.
Ornery old ponies.
Yeah.
Just like,
I just noticed, you said Sky is your,
Sky,
been watching this whole thing, but I didn't notice till now. Next to your hair, that looks like mountains.
Where?
His patch.
Oh.
The color in
Oh,
between
yeah, it does, yeah.
between the halter
It does,
and your
it's quite,
hair.
yeah, it's very
Well,
nice.
but I
yeah.
didn't notice it until you
We're
were
soulmates.
Yeah,
They're so
sometimes.
Well,
It
his
looks like
name is
mountains.
fitting then, right?
He's got his 2 blue eyes.
Yeah.
People, like the horse people I know, say that you have that one horse. You have that one horse of your lifetime. Sky, I think, is my one horse.
Oh.
So, knock on wood, he's still going strong at 19. But
I think he's definitely sticking out his tongue at the photographer.
he
Well,
was
the next
he
shot
was
is
doing
a
something
precious
unprofessional.
together.
Well, we're trying to get like a professional
So
headshot.
funny, though.
But this
Perfect
ended
kid
up being
But
this is my
look at those
favorite of
eyes.
all of
It's
them.
like, I'll show you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's us, you know. It's
That's so
like,
cool.
yes.
I'm wondering if, before you wrap up, if you'd like to just mention your upcoming book.
I'd like to hear about that too,
Yes.
Mark. Thank you.
Nest.
Maybe, yeah, I mean, we've got, what, 5-10 minutes?
Sure. Yes.
Yes.
So our wonderful illustrator, Jennifer Ard, is here.
Hey.
Yes.
And Jen and I worked on a picture book called Nest, and she created some wonderful artwork that has birds of North America in it. And I wrote, it's a sestina, so it's a non-rhyming poem, but it does have repetition in it. And she created the art with various birds and their nests and their families, and then she built all kinds of back matter to support the science, the STEM learning outcomes for the birds of North America. And we saw sneak previews of it, and it's getting ready to be printed in advanced reader copies. We had hoped to have copies for this, but they couldn't get them here in time, so hopefully soon, but it should be out in the fall. And it's absolutely adorable. Your birds and the babies are so cute. I can't wait to get out there to the world. Yeah.
What's the reason you chose format, Sestina format?
I like the repetition. Yeah, and the way it kind of like circles and dips back in parts, and it kind of reminded me of the way birds can kind of dip and circle back in places. So I like that visual. Yeah. So, yeah. But
Please.
her birds and the babies are so cute.
Can't wait to share it.
You want to talk some more about it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I will. I will at one.
At one,
right?
yeah.
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 Did you write that for the Western Heritage Program?
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah.
So it was during the pandemic.
Yes.
Yes. And the Western Heritage Center had done an online exhibit because they couldn't have people in because of COVID. So I was working on this idea that I'd been kind of tossing around. The word nest wouldn't leave my mind. Like I couldn't get rid of nest. It was just hanging around in there. I even went to an antique store in town and they had a sign on wood that said nest painted on it. So I bought it and I took it home and I hung it in my house. I'm like, this is a sign from the universe. Literally, a literal sign. I need the literal signs. So I started working on it, and when I saw the call from Kevin at the Western Heritage Center, and I was like, and I knew Jen's illustrations, and I've seen her cute little adorable birds, and I knew right away, I was like, she's got to do it because her birds are just so charming. So I was like, Jen. And she said yes. So she made one image that was absolutely adorable, and she put the words on it. We sent it to Western Heritage Center, and they put it in their virtual image gallery. Got really good feedback, and people were emailing us asking us if we'd sell posters. And I was like, I don't really think we're in the poster business, but maybe we should do something more with this if people like it. So then I reached out to Belu Books again, and because I know they like educational things that they can use in classrooms, and they just jumped on it. They're like, yes. So Jen got to work.
I get to share it today.
Yep. She got a sneak peek today.
What was the exhibit for at
Western Heritage Center. It
And
was a
was it a
call
theme
for
or-
artists and it was there was a theme. It was about the pandemic.
Yeah.
Do you remember what it was?
I
You remember you put
I'll look at my
Erica was in it too.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have a link to
Yeah,
it.
I don't remember what it
It
was.
was like art in isolation.
Yes,
Yes.
that's what it was. Art in isolation.
Art
Yep.
in isolation.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you had a
I had a
piece.
print.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
That was
It was a cool exhibit.
Yeah, it was awesome. So kind of got the ball rolling. Yeah.
And they changed it.
It was fun. Right. And we have door prizes. So some
I have
goodies.
one more question before you do
Oh,
door
okay.
prizes.
Okay.
How do we get Ruffian